Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Applications Committee. My name is Councillor Anne Siren, and I'm the Vice Chairman for the Planning Committee, and I'll be chairing this committee meeting tonight. Before we start, and for those of you who don't attend this meeting regularly, it's probably useful to just explain who everyone is. So on my right are my fellow councillors, and we will be making the decisions on the applications tonight. And on my left are the planning officers who will be giving us their professional advice and opinions on the cases before us. The way that it works with the speakers is that at the appropriate point I will ask the applicants and the objectors to come to, where are they coming to speak? Here? Or do they speak? Oh, you speak, okay, you speak from your seats. And each objector or supporter will have a total of 3 minutes, or where there is a group, you will share the 3 minutes, and us councillors might ask questions of you. And we can't allow people from the floor to participate in the debate other than through these formal mechanisms. So turning to the agenda, are there any apologies for absence? No apologies. Are there any declarations of interest? Councillor Indris.
The only thing is there are 2 cases on the South Park, S72, 73, 76 and 77. They are in my ward, but I haven't spoken to anyone about them.
You have an open mind?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Any other declarations of interest? Any other declarations? So then next is to sign off the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 11th of June. Actually, I was at the start of this meeting, but Councillor Aretti, you were on the committee that evening, and Councillor Idris. Can I take these as a fair reflection of the conversations? So those minutes are signed off. And the agenda, there have been a couple of changes. So the list of cases that we are here tonight is as in the speakers list, which hopefully you've all picked up. And it is quite a long agenda, so I apologise to those who are later on for the time you might have to wait to get to yours. So we will start with the application for the town hall. And Ms. Culver, could you please introduce the case to us, the application?
Of course, thank you, Chair. So the application before members this evening is an application that was presented to members in the Planning Application Committee in November. So this application relates to the Town Hall. The site location can be seen on the slide before you. So the application proposes a change of use of the basement car park to provide a flexible workspace and an ancillary welfare provision, and including a change of use to provide a training facility and a self-storage facility. So the application was presented to members in November with a recommendation to grant planning permission. However, that application was deferred due to concerns raised by members on the evening of committee. Since then, the application has been appealed for non-determination, so the local planning authority can no longer make a decision on this application. However, officers this evening are asking what members would have been minded to decide should they have been able to decide the application. So I would draw members' attention to the addendum report. So that does look at some corrections to the officer's report. So it might be helpful if we go through those together. So with specific reference to the concerns and the matters that sought the deferral of the application in the last committee, they have been set out in the addendum with the relevant condition that officers feel can be used to deal with that concern. So they've been listed within paragraph 2.3. And then moving slightly on the addendum to the amendment to paragraph 3.1, this sets out that as the local planning authority cannot make a decision given the appeal, officers are seeking views from members on the following. So if the LPA would have been able to determine the application and the following objection received during the course of the application, would members been minded to refuse planning permission for the following reason? And that relates to fire safety. Officers are also seeking views from members to understand if you consider that some or all of the recommended conditions and reasons are inadequate to address the concerns raised by members previously regarding the information submitted with the application and therefore should form part of their own separate reason for refusal. Members are also requested to delegate authority to the Director of the Planning in Place to defend the non-determination appeal to the Planning Inspectorate and to put forward the list of recommended conditions and reasons as part of that appeal process. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Carver. So we have the local ward councillors registered to speak, Councillor North, Councillor Hutt and Councillor Fawkes. So you have a total of 3 minutes to present your views.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to speak on behalf of all 3 ward councillors, if I may.
Yes, that's fine, Councillor North.
Thank you. We are the local ward councillors here tonight representing the residents of Camden Ward. We recognise that the committee is not looking to determine on this application tonight, but we feel that we should speak out for our residents and for the best interests of the borough, our council taxpayers, and for this building, our much-loved town hall. I was in the chamber last November when this case was considered by committee. After that meeting, I expected some communication from the applicants. We suggested they engage with local residents. We would be happy to host a meeting at the town hall, leaflet drop, door knock. Local residents care about what happens to their town hall. We are not objecting to this proposal in principle, as long as it presents good value for the borough. It makes good use of the space of the building and is properly presented with correct evidence. Most importantly, and for a public building, we would like to see a clear fire and safety strategy report. It needs to be compliant with policy D12 of the London Plan and policy CD15 of the LPR. We also strongly support our local planning authority being able to decide on local cases, such as this case. We support the original referral to return to this committee with certain questions answered. We trust that despite this appeal from the applicants, this case should be scrutinised here in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, as it very much affects the people of this borough. There are also many valid concerns and questions from residents, unsure if we would lose too many parking spaces, unsure if it might lead to more traffic around the town hall, queues on an already busy Camden Hill Road, were the surveys done and were they accurate and were they recent? This morning at 9 o'clock I visited the lower basement car park and it was almost full. We listened and believe that this committee was right not to decide the case at the last hearing but refer it back to committee. Why was there no further contact? Where was the further information required? This case is complex. It needs detail and explaining. I had hoped that the applicants might speak tonight, but I see that they're not listed to do so. We want this important proposal to be properly presented with clear evidence, properly explained with up-to-date analysis, properly consulted with residents fully aware, and properly considered by this committee on behalf of the borough and its residents. We thank the committee and are happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Councillor North. Does anybody have any questions for the councillors? Actually, I have one question, which is, could you describe for the committee the consultation which took place when the application was initially presented?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for hearing us on this. Yes, there was a consultation in that apparently the applicant said that they distributed 500 leaflets, although a lot of our residents said that they never actually received any of those leaflets. So as a result of that, we actually invited people to come in to speak with us at the town hall, where we had officers and the applicants here to more fully explain, and we had the then lead member, Councillor Kim Taylor-Smith, who also was in the meeting to explain the proposal for it. And individually, all three of us have spoken to residents about their concerns. And as Councillor North has already pointed out, we absolutely recognise that there are a lot of concerns, but we also recognise that the town hall needs to maximise its space, it's a very big space, to the best way that it can. But as Councillor North has pointed out, we are not satisfied as yet that we've had the full data and the full survey to feel content with the current state of play. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fawkes. Okay, colleagues, so I think it would be helpful for us to consider each of the conditions that were proposed and whether they in themselves can form reasons for refusal. I mean, I think we want to start by saying it's really disappointing that we haven't heard from the applicant at all since the last committee meeting. I mean, these are really serious concerns, particularly around fire. And, you know, for me, there was a huge omission from the original application around fire safety and an exit plan in case of an emergency. And given the risks of the subterranean structure, it just was really surprising to me that they didn't feel that that was an important part of the application, and they didn't come back with any proposal after the first committee building. I mean, it is worth remembering that this is a public building with a lot of people working here and a lot of residents coming here. We have the Great Hall, we have the library. At any time, there is a big mix of people. And these self-storage units, we probably know them, they are unmanned. There's nobody checking what goes in these storage units, and we've got no way, and the applicant hasn't provided any mechanism for us knowing what there is. So if something were to be in there like an e-bike and it exploded, I mean, you can only begin to imagine what consequences that might have. For me, the fire safety strategy forms an absolutely integral part of this application, and I would go so far as to say, given how deep this car park is, I would actually question whether it's possible to even have a fire strategy that could safely exit people. There aren't many exits. There could be disabled people down there working in the storage unit. I'd be interested in your views on whether it's even possible to have such a thing. Could we even have a safe fire strategy that we would be comfortable with? So I guess if we were to go through each of these...
Sorry, Chairman. I was just going to say we've sort of skipped a part of the process.
Okay.
In that normally after the members have questioned the speakers, they question officers. So we've sort of...
Sure, but I was just saying I was just asking whether the committee were
Yeah.
happy to go through each
Oh yeah,
one,
that's
and
fine.
For me, the fire strategy would be the first one to
Absolutely,
discuss.
that's
So
fine. Just
I'm
wanted
just
to
opening up that
Okay.
conversation. So yes, any questions or thoughts to the officers on the fire safety aspect? Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is not to the officers, I'll come back to the officers in a minute, but to the objectors and fellow councillors. I understand the safety is important, and the fire safety, obviously what happened in the borough, and that we have to take as a borough every precaution to make sure that the safety of our residents in all our wards are safe. But my question to you is, what about air pollution and heavy street use? Because I drive around here, and sometimes when you come, it's a bit, even vehicles, when it's being overused, and that creates air pollution. So was there any impact? And I've read the report, 69 residents actually objected to this. So, and I've gone through their comments, but tell me about it, if you don't mind, about the impact of air pollution to the local residents, as well as any other issues.
Thank you very much. That's a very pertinent question. And it certainly was a major concern by residents, particularly those residents that live on Hornton Street and Camden Hill Road, because of course the people would be driving around the whole time. And that was one of the data, the more data and survey that we asked the applicants to make, that they could actually do a sort of proper data. So I know that one is in the pack, but we weren't particularly persuaded that that was the right figures or the right estimates on the number of cars that were going in and out, particularly because when they were originally done, I think it was dated back to COVID, and of course now we know there's been a huge increase in traffic in the area, and also of course a huge increase, as Councillor North has already said, of people wanting to use the car park. So I don't know if that helps answer your question.
Okay, if there are no more questions to councillors, then shall we move on to questions to officers around the fire safety aspect? Okay, Councillor Retty, do you want to start?
Thank you, Chair. Question about, is there a reason why the applicant hasn't produced the fire strategy? Is it just because to bend the process, or I don't know, to bypass and make it, leave it to the inspectorate, or I don't know, is it deliberately done? I just want to question the commitment to the local community and the area. So, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. So, since the application was last deferred, officers have been in contact with the applicant seeking the additional information. No additional information has been provided. In specific relation to the fire statement, I'm not entirely sure why it wasn't provided. However, it should have been. And as mentioned in the officer's report, we do have concerns based on the information provided, which is why officers are recommending that it should form a reason for refusal a reason for refusal that we will put forward to the planning inspectorate.
Sorry, Councillor Retty, put your mic on.
Any comment from the legal staff or about why? Is there a reason? I mean, from the applicant perspective, sometimes you could bend the process. Is that why? Well, it's just making an assumption, really. I'm not sure.
Are you asking me why they didn't provide the fire safety information?
Is there a way, if you don't provide that, you could bypass sort of, the process and then get it approved at the inspectorate level or something? Is there a way, or historic cases like this?
Well, I think this is information that is required prior to that stage. I mean, we didn't have it in November, and I think it was because the planning officers spoke to the building control people, and it arose out of that. So it actually arose after the November committee. But I haven't been involved myself in the case since then, but I understand that the applicants were asked for this information and they just didn't come forward with it. And it certainly is relevant, and it's something that the officers have recommended, that had you been able to determine this application, that is something that they've recommended that you would be minded to refuse for lack of the fire safety because of the importance of it. It certainly is a material consideration, and it's something that just hasn't been provided, which should have been. And there is an objection from the building control people in relation to that. So does that answer your query?
Councillor Idris.
Just a quick question. Why did they go to appeal? I mean, how late were we in getting back to them? Because if they were supposed to bring us more information based on the deferral last time, isn't it their responsibility to bring those things that we asked for as opposed to us chasing them for it?
I can answer this. We won't be able to say for sure why the applicant went to appeal. It may be that there could be several reasons. It'll be hard to say for sure. But I think the reason it was delayed, or at least one of the reasons it was delayed, is because we were seeking this additional information, rightfully so. And there's only so many times we can ask for it. And then I think at some point the applicants felt that it may be that they felt that was the best route forward to get through the application. But I think I speak on behalf of officers that we're equally as frustrated that the information wasn't provided, rather. But yes, we have no control over whether or not and when they appeal. I think it was likely that they felt that was the best option for them.
Also, another question. I'm curious, how much was the plan expected to generate versus what we're generating right now, income-wise?
Oh, unfortunately, I won't have that information. That's not something that, as a planning officer, we would consider. So if I had it, I'd be more than happy to share, but that's not information they normally share with us.
Okay, then the fact that they were supposed to come back to us with more information and failed to do so, does that work in our favor?
Well, yes, because the information that we asked for, particularly the fire safety information, is very important to have up front. At least that's what officers feel. And so for that reason, that's why we're recommending that forms one of the reasons for refusal, because without that information, we cannot determine whether or not the scheme would comply with the relevant policies. There are some other bits of information that were requested that we think could be dealt with by condition, but for other reasons. But it was in particular the fire safety aspect that we felt needed to be provided up front, and without it up front, we can't confirm compliance with the relevant local development plan policies. Sure.
Okay, Councillor Svedek.
Fire related. Or can I ask a question about the parking in the, or are we going to go through?
We should talk first about the fire safety and then move on. Some of the other pieces of information that were requested. Would that be a good way to go through this?
Yeah, yes, that's okay, because we can determine whether or not committee members agree with that recommended reason for refusal, and then we can move on to, I suppose, whether or not they agree with...
Should we vote on each one, or...?
I think that we'd normally vote on the recommendation as a whole, but then if there was aspects about it that would change, I think you would then vote on where they're happy with those changes. I think that's correct. Or am I wrong?
No, not at all. I think we might as well have the discussion on all of the concerns, though.
And then move on to the vote.
Well,
then consider all the other concerns, and then go back to the recommendation when
and see if anything needs adjustment.
sort of clear of what the position is.
Okay.
You've identified all the concerns, and then say we vote on the recommendation. We might be minded to have done this and minded to have done that.
Okay. So, does anybody else have any other comments or questions on the fire strategy? Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. To the officers, this is not a new application as it was referred before. My question to you is, when you offered this information to, given the time to the applicant and offer for them to provide this information to submit to the planning committee, and did you clearly demonstrate that this application does not is not compliant with the policy D12 as well as the London plan? And what was the response, as well as D15, and what was the response? And my second question to you is, have you given them the chance to appear again, to appear here tonight, this evening, and put their case forward so that we can ask them question directly, as many other residents do come here and give us answers to the questions before we make a decision as councillors?
Yes, to answer in short, it's yes to both. We did, when we explained to the applicant that this was a concern, we did link it why it was a concern, so fire safety being paramount, but also the fact that it would fail to comply with the relevant development plan policy, so they were aware of that. And secondly, yes, they would have been offered the opportunity to speak tonight. They would have been notified of committee. I think they just chose not to. And unfortunately, I can't answer for them why, but yeah, they were notified.
That answers my question. Thank you.
Okay, so does anybody have any other points or questions around the fire strategy? In that case, shall we move on to Councillor Svedenik about the parking questions that you had?
Thank you. I just wanted to know from officers whether we did receive any additional information from the applicant concerning the extent to which the existing car park is being used, whether it's being used to capacity or not, and the impact that the loss of parking spaces will have, especially considering we'd be introducing a flexible workplace. We'd have more people coming in and we're actually reducing the number of car spaces. What impact would that have, particularly on for the residents on Hornton Street?
Thank you, Councillor. So, taking the first part of your question, there hasn't been any additional information submitted as part of this application since November, so since the application was deferred with the concerns about the car park management details, so that there hasn't been any new information for members to consider. I would draw your attention to the officer's report for the original application, specifically paragraph 6.21 onwards, which discusses the loss of the car parking capacity. So a transport statement and a survey was carried out, I believe, in May 2022, and it looked at the car parking spaces within the town hall. So it suggests that there are currently approximately 325 public car parking spaces, and that a total of 153 of those car parking spaces would be retained. So there would be a reduction of around 52% compared to the existing car parking spaces. Officers consider that it wouldn't have a detrimental impact on the surrounding highway network or the living conditions of nearby properties, subject to that recommended condition, which is condition 7 for a car park management plan.
Do we know if, Councillor North said he was there at 9 this morning and the car park was full. Do we know, I understand officers have said it won't have an impact, but if it's full all the time, then surely it must have an impact.
So I believe as part of this application, we have consulted with our highways team. They have reviewed the transport statement and the surveys carried out, and they're satisfied, subject to conditions, that it wouldn't have a material impact or a detrimental impact on the surrounding highway network. Members may consider that it would do, and that would be for members this evening to determine or to suggest to officers what they would have been minded to refuse on if that forms another concern or another reason for refusal to be presented to the Planning Inspectorate.
Councillor Idris.
I asked earlier if we have figures money-wise, what the proposal will give us versus what exists right now. But now in your answer, you said we lose 52% of the parking spaces. I think by any mathematics, that is not a productive, that's not a positive gain. If you lose 52% of your income, by any means, it's not a positive gain, unless they are paying us exorbitant amount of money to mitigate that. So I'm a little bit puzzled. How was that idea in the first place a good one? But then that's a comment, not a question.
Thank you, Councillor. So, as Wade has touched on this evening, the viability of the proposal or potential profit or any income wouldn't be a consideration for a planning application. We would be looking at the policies of the development plan and assessing it against that. So it wouldn't form part of our consideration.
So I think what we should be thinking about is, are we uncomfortable with the loss of those car parking spaces? Councillor Ali.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think it's important, the point you've mentioned, Councillor Joyce, but the fact of the matter is, even if they were to offer huge sums of money, and fire safety is number one for the council, and I'm sure everyone will agree, and what we have gone through in the council. So, although we will leave it to the finance teams to deal with which company suits the best, and I'm sure we're not here to definitely discuss in terms of the bidding and the financial for the residents, obviously the money that the council gets to serve the residents, but ultimately I believe it's coming back to the safety of our residents, and I think on that note we will be voting solely on the fire issue and on the safety of our residents.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. So I think we're all agreed on the fire safety aspect being the number one reason. I guess what we're sort of exploring now is, are there other reasons that can be added, and would the loss of those car parking spaces be enough of a concern to the committee that we would include it as another reason for refusal?
Also, I don't know whether we can include the fact that they had ample time to come back to us with responses to what the previous committee asked, and they didn't, which to us seems like they didn't care really.
Well, I mean, I think it's just an indication of how concerned they are about our residents and, you know, fire safety. We can't say why they haven't come back. They haven't. We have to deal with the situation as it is. So we're being asked to think about, if we were minded to have refused this, what the reasons would be. We've said fire strategy. Now we're talking about the parking. Is that enough of a concern to us to add it or not?
Sorry.
Councillor Zvedenik.
Doesn't seem to be working. Yeah, so I think obviously the issue concerning the car parks is secondary to fire safety, but I also think it just speaks to the, I suppose, the overall design of this entire proposal and how well it fits into the community around it. And I think it's not just, you know, there's a loss of you know, we're introducing more people because there'll be a flexible workspace. It's a loss of car park. It's also on the corner of our high street, and we're meant to be you know, supporting our high streets. And lots of people might not be able to take public transport. They might be reliant on cars, and I think taking car space away from such a sort of vital hub in the borough is, it's, to me, it just speaks to whether this proposal is community minded or not.
So I'm kind of getting from that you would want to include the loss of the car parking spaces as a reason. Okay. Okay. So
I just thought it might be worth making a few observations that might help members and voters tonight. I was just reading through the office report again, just to remind myself, because I remember it was in here, that the officers made an assessment on the reduction in car parking spaces, and specifically notes that a reduction is technically supported in policy because the London Plan seeks the lowest viable amount of parking spaces and sets maximum standards rather than minimum standards for that reason, and encourages more sustainable means of transport like bus and tube, etc. And being such a highly accessible location, that would technically be policy compliant. There's also an assessment here about trip generation, and given that self-storage is quite a low trip generating use versus a car park, there would actually be a reduction in the amount of vehicles coming to and from the site. So that's the assessment that the office provided. Now that doesn't mean that the committee necessarily needs to agree with that. I just wanted to flag it for consideration, that's all. Sure.
Councillor Oretti.
Thank you, Mr. Wade, but I agree what you said, but this is an existing car park, and a loss of car parking space is a community loss. That's why I put it. I understand your rationale against, you know, sustainable travel, but we're not sort of using this space to extend car park, but this is an existing car park. So I see that as a loss of community space. So in that respect, I strongly believe that the loss of community space in terms of the public benefit would outweigh, would be in favor of refusing the application along with the fire. Obviously, fire is the topmost priority. Having looked at the historic incidents across the nation, protection of lives, not just for the residents but also for the staff, is the topmost priority. So that's one, and loss of public community space is number two. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I mean, that's perfectly understood. So just to be clear, just to help us drafting the reason for refusal, are we going to make the argument that, to link it back to policy, that there is while car parking spaces are not necessarily protected, a loss of that number of car parking spaces may result in spillover traffic onto the road, and that could have an impact on the highway, because we can link that directly to policy. Is just to make sure I'm clear, is that what we... Yeah, okay. No, that's helpful, thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, now looking at the other pieces of information that we have and the other conditions, are there any other possible reasons for refusal? I have one question, which is around the office space, and I know that concern for the previous committee was about the nature of that office space, which is very underground, little ventilation, no natural light. The working conditions would be very, very poor. Is there anything in our policies or within national policies that we could use that as a reason for refusal? Because we have people working in the town hall, and I feel that anybody should have the same standards.
I completely appreciate your concern, and it makes perfect sense. Unfortunately, there are no specific policies in our current local development plan that require, let's say, natural light or ventilation, or natural ventilation to that space. It will likely be mechanically ventilated, but I know that's not quite what you're referring to. So in short, I don't think there's a specific policy that would address that.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other thoughts about reasons for refusal? Any others? Okay. So how do we progress now? I think we've got two reasons that the committee feel strongly should be given as reasons for possible refusal. Do you want us to vote on those two reasons, or how should we? Sorry, it's a bit unusual, this case.
Yeah, no,
so.
I just wonder whether to work through the...
Oh, you want to work through everything?
The second one is the thing that would be minded also to refuse in relation to car parking.
Yeah.
So you could amalgamate them all. So basically then, are you saying you'd be minded to refuse because the applicant has failed, the applicant has failed to demonstrate with the submission of an appropriate fire strategy that the proposal will ensure the highest standards of fire safety, so that you'd be minded to refuse for that reason. And then also going into recommendation 2, you'd be minded to refuse because of the loss of car parking and the associated overspill onto the public highway and causing traffic congestion and problems with highway safety, etc. So that would be 1 and 2 sort of merged together. But those are the only reasons that you'd be minded to refuse on, yeah?
It feels like that, yes.
Yes, it does, yes. And then 3, recommendation 3 is just to delegate to the Director of Planning and Place to defend the appeal, put forward conditions that we would have to do as, you know, in the course of the appeal, as the planning inspector wanted to do that. But so you could just, if you're happy with all of that, then you could just, all of you, vote now on that. Unless you've got any other questions in the meantime.
Councillor Ali.
No, I agree with that, Chair, and I was thinking to propose that what the officer just quoted, and then someone else will second it and we vote on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and are we happy to delegate the wording of both to the officers? I think we're happy with that.
Yes, we,
Okay, all right. So shall we put that, do we need to put together a motion, or how do we vote on that?
Well, I don't actually think you need to propose and second,
Okay.
because it's all
Because it's not really a...
part of the recommendation, but let's just for the record, let's do that. Let's
Okay.
just someone proposed and seconded, just to be on the safe side.
Chair, that's what I commented earlier. I said I'm happy to propose, someone else will second it, I will be on the record, so.
Okay, so everybody in favour of the motion, please show.
Sorry, who seconded?
Sorry, Councillor Oretti.
Okay, sorry, yeah. Okay, brilliant.
So, in favour?
Okay, that's unanimous.
Okay.
Okay. All right, that's fine.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the next application. I think if we're done on that, are we done? Yep, good, okay. So the next application is 16 Pembroke Road. Again, Alice, if you could please present the application to us.
Thank you. So the application before members this evening relates to a property on 16 Pembroke Road. Before I begin my presentation, again, I would draw members' attention to the addendum report, just with some few corrections to the officer's report. So the application site relates to number 16 Pembroke Road, a property located to the northern side of the street, identified by the red arrow on the slide before members. There is a road to the rear of the site, which is Pembroke Walk, and the site does include a detached garage, which members can see on the slide, the photo on the slide before them. So the site is identified in the red line boundary on the image to the left, and then the image on the right of the slide is that detached garage at the rear, which fronts onto Pembroke Walk. So the application before members seeks planning permission for the creation of a single-storey basement and some other associated alterations to the garden studio or the garage to the back of the site. So this is the existing section. So this is the existing detached garage to the rear of the site. And then this is the existing property and the frontage onto Pembridge Road here. This is the proposed section, so I draw members' attention to the single-storey basement located to the front in this location, and then the single-storey basement under the existing garage in this location here. These are the existing elevations, so the existing front elevation, the existing rear. On the right hand of the image is the existing elevation of the garage or the studio to the back of the site. So this is the elevation which fronts onto Pembroke Walk, and then this is the elevation which fronts onto the rear garden of the site. This is the proposed elevations, so I draw members' attention to the alterations to the rear garage or the rear studio, so members can note the changes in the fenestration and the change to the garage door, which would front onto Pembroke Walk. And then members can also note the change in the fenestration on the rear of this building, the addition of the roof lights and the solar panels. There is also a new light well created to provide light and ventilation into the basement. This slide just shows the existing lower ground floor. So this includes the lower ground floor of the existing property, but also then extends to that existing studio or garage building to the rear of the site. And then this shows the proposed plans for the studio. So it would be converted, so it would house a bedroom and ensuite at the basement level, and then at ground floor level would be a studio or some living accommodation. The detached studio would be used ancillary to the existing residential property at number 16, and that has been included in one of the recommended conditions before members this evening. That concludes my presentation. Officer's recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to the recommended conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carver. So we have some registered speakers. We will start with the applicant agent, Ms. Brooke and Mr. Smith. Oh, I'm so sorry. Sorry. We'll start with the objectors. So the objectors are Barry Monday, Elizabeth Marika and Christopher Fair. So between you, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm Barry Monday. I'm Chair of ESSA. I'll speak first, and then I'll hand over to Mr. Fair to carry on. ESSA has objected to several aspects of this application, as detailed in our written submission. It's good to see that at least one of our concerns has been partially addressed, and that's there is now a metre of soil above most, but not all of the proposed front basement. And we'd like to see that made fully compliant. Turning to the proposed development at the end of the garden, back in 1991, a conditional permission was granted for a pitched roof to be added to the existing garage. One of the conditions was that the garage should continue to be used for garage use only and not residential. And the reason for this was that other uses would be, and I quote, prejudicial to the amenities of other residential buildings and the area generally. 30 plus years later, the local plan policy CL5 requires reasonable visual privacy, no harmful increase in the sense of enclosure, disturbance, increase in traffic, servicing, parking and noise. We therefore don't understand the officer's report, which says the land use would ensure good living conditions continuing for neighbouring occupants. We also note that separately the Council's Highways Officer has objected to the loss of garage use. Given the extremely narrow nature of Pembroke Walk and the proximity of the proposed development to the properties on the north side of Pembroke Walk and on the east side of Pembroke Villas, these proposals are bound to affect the living conditions of the neighbours. For instance, the windows on the north elevation would be less than 3 metres away from number 3 Pembroke Walk. So my question is, why would it now be acceptable to allow these changes when it was not back in 1990? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to follow on from that, just to say that really that the garage is in an unusually sensitive location due to the extremely close proximity to 4 neighbouring properties at 6 and 7 Pembroke Villas and 3 and 4 Pembroke Walk, as shown previously circulated photographs. Conversion of the garage into an annex or living unit would inevitably adversely affect the living conditions of these properties by creating a future source of noise, disturbance, and intrusion on privacy, with the proposed windows and skylights resulting in a directly negative impact of overlooking and light pollution. We therefore feel it unreasonable to change the condition applied to the approval to the garage construction in 1991, which stated that it should only be for garage use and not residential, so as not to be prejudicial to the amenities of other residential buildings and the area generally. Thank you.
Colleagues, do we have any questions for the objectors? Questions first? Okay, and then we have the questions. Okay, I apologise. So, could I please ask the agent for the applicant? Is that you? So together you have 3 minutes to address the committee. Please go ahead.
This is a minor householder application recommended for approval, and I'll speak on the relevant points. 1. Will the development preserve and enhance the character of the conservation area? There will be no change to the street frontage of Pembroke Road and only a minor alteration to the existing doors of the rear garden studio facing onto Pembroke Walk at the rear. The existing metal doors are not in keeping with the conservation area, and new timber doors are proposed with high-level glazing to fit within the existing opening, not allowing direct outlook onto the walk. 2. Is there any adverse impact on loss of off-street parking? Simply put, it is impossible to park a car in the building, and the traffic department agreed with this view when the council granted permission for the conversion of the garage opposite at 4 Pembroke Walk 5 years ago. The walk is only 3 metres wide, the turning circle is too tight, and the challenge is evident by the bumper bars installed on the house opposite. Further, it is not possible to open the existing garage door given that there is an internal wall dividing the space in front of the door and also behind the doors for half its length. These walls restrict both the opening and mechanism of the garage door. As such, the existing rear building has been used as a garden studio since the applicants purchased the property in May 1995. They have never parked a car here and there is no loss, therefore, of off-street parking. On this basis, the building has always provided separate ancillary accommodation for our applicant. Used as a playroom and a place to entertain friends, the building has full electrics along with heating commensurate with accommodation use. Internally, the space is a kitchen, sitting room and storage area with a cabinetry predating their ownership. The studio has been seen by the planning officer who took photographs internally. The use of the building will not change, and so it's not considered that noise will be any different to how it has been over the last 29 years. The officer report for the application for the conversion of the existing garage opposite at 4 Pembroke Walk had a similar existing condition attached to a previous planning consent, restricting its use there to be retained for the accommodation, quotes, only of private vehicles used by occupiers of the premises. However, the councillor's transport officer then concurred with that 2019 application with our view today, I quote, that access to and egress from the existing garage to the street would be challenging. The loss of the garage would unlikely lead to the displacement of parking demand onto Residence Bay permit bays and would not conflict with CT1. This view is supported today in the Director's report for this application. Further comments regarding trees, construction for the works, noise and light pollution have also been dealt with by either pre-commencement conditions and or have been satisfied within the Director report. The basement has, following comments, 1 metre of topsoil was added and the basement lowered. This is for the extent of the basement under the front garden, but in the section seen does not include under the front path because it would not be possible to have planting directly over the width of the path to access the building because you need to step through. Lastly, I'd like to take note that the applicants have been eager to engage with their neighbours and discuss the works as possible. This was done ahead of the submission date on the 15th of March and includes 7 Pembroke Villas, 4 Pembroke Walk, 14 Pembroke Road, 6 Pembroke Road, and I note the CTMR included several consultation letters sent to neighbours. There was a preceding planning application submitted in August 2023, which was withdrawn in order to respond and address neighbours' comments and the objections then raised by ESSA, the conservation area objections at that time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, committee, have you got any questions for the objector or for the agent? Councillor Idris.
I've got a couple of questions, one for each, to the objector. Did you receive the consultation? Have you aired your views during that?
If you're speaking about ESSA, myself, no, we didn't receive any communication before the application.
Then my question to the applicant. You said something about the garage door is you can't use it. There is a wall, something inside. You can't open the garage door. I'm just curious. Was that a wall that has been built afterwards, or has it been there all the time?
So currently there is an internal partition seen on the existing plan that divides the space between the sitting room and storage area, and it also runs along the half length of the existing garage door. This has been there for longer than since 2002, when the studio was used as a kitchen for the house for a time, and they have never been able to park a car in the studio. There is cabinetry already there, predating their arrival in 1995.
When you say studio, you mean the garage? Because is it the same thing, or are they two separate things?
Thank you. It's the same building, so because it's never been used as car parking or as a garage since they bought it in 95, it's been used by their 3 children for who are now in their 20s as a playroom, entertainment space, a kitchen, and a place to entertain friends, not as car parking.
Will you change the door? I can't remember. Will you change the door for the studio garage?
Yes, thank you. So the proposal is to remove the existing metal garage door, which is seen in that photo there. Visually, nothing else will change except the replacement of that garage door, so the brickwork and roof will remain. And in keeping with traditional Mews frontages, there will be a timber door in place that has high-level windows with mullions, small picture windows at high level. These are at high level to restrict direct overlooking onto the walk and neighbouring properties.
Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions, Councillors Verdanek?
A question to the objectors. You mentioned that the windows of this garage or studio would be less than 3 metres away from 4 neighbouring properties. I wonder if you could, if you're able to let me know whether this would be unusual or uncommon on Pembroke Walk or the sort of neighbouring area, because I assume a lot of properties have either studios or garages or something as well. So what would be sort of different about this compared to the others?
There is no other property on Pembroke Walk that is this distance away, 3 metres, and facing each other. That's number one. For, I would say, about 90% of the walk, it's designed so that any windows are opposite either a forecourt and a garage and much further away, or a blank wall. The exception is right at the end of the walk, where there are 2 properties that on each side that, well, probably 2 and 1 that face each other, and they are divided by, well, it's much wider, possibly, I haven't measured it, but I would think 2 or 3 times the width. And in front of these properties, there are also a hedge and a wall, so it's a completely different setup. And I mean, this garage, which is opposite 3 Pembroke Walk and 4 Pembroke Walk, on directly facing, is the narrowest part of the walk at 3 metres. Well, it's less than 3 metres. It's about, however, 2.85. And so, yes, I would say it is an exception. Also, it is not used. There isn't any noise. There isn't any coming and going. And this is a just complete change of the property. And our living conditions, and also onto Pembroke Villas, which also is very, very close. So that's basically it. Anything else?
Councillor Retty.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is to the agent and the applicant, and then follow up to the objectives. To the agent, I know you probably heard from the objectives about the living condition CL5. Just to clarify, the usage from a garage or kind of garage to a residential place, would you have access from behind onto Pembroke Walk? Is an access way, because that's predominantly the main, I would say, issue, because otherwise it will be internally dealt with. So could you explain that, and then I have a follow-up to the objectives. Thank you.
Thank you. Currently within that existing garage door, there is a single pass door about the width of 70 centimetres on the left-hand side. That
is there a visual for that? Thank you.
Maybe in the photo. It's hard to see from the photo, but you can see it in the plan if you go back. So you can just about see, it's quite hard to see, a sort of vertical line on the left-hand side. Yeah, we get a bit further over. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there. So to the left-hand side of that arrow, that portion of the door opens as a pass door, and within the deeds of the house, they have rights over the walk for access to and from contained within the original deeds, and within the new garage doors, that doorway, the same width, will be retained for access to and from the building. There'll be no change. Thank you.
Right, thank you. So coming back, thank you for that answer. Coming back to the residents, I understand you raised an objection for CL5, which is living conditions to the neighbouring properties. From the response from the applicant, that's an existing access. Rest all are done either in the basement level, which are not technically visible, so there's no adjustments to the townscape or streetscape. What are your main objections if that's an existing access? What sort of adverse impact of the proposed development would create issues? Issues for the neighbours or the residents nearby. Thank you.
I think the difference that it, as proposed, is residential rather than being used as a storeroom come day room, and the potential for more noise and disturbance from what is really going to be a residential unit, albeit part of the main house, but there would be more activity, and the neighbouring houses that were mentioned at the bottom of the garden there, the ones in Pembroke Walk and in Pembroke Villas, are very sensitive to any activity done at the bottom of that garden because of the proximity, which is extremely close. 2.5 metres away, 3 metres at best, 2.85 to the walk. So anything that results in a sort of sleeping accommodation, which could become used for more extensively than at the moment, is a potential problem in the future.
Can I have a follow-up? Sorry.
One more follow-up.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. Going back to the applicant, you heard it from the objector. Could you just roughly define the intention of use of that space? I understand it's in the application, but could you just define the mitigations that just raised by the objectors? Thank you.
So, thank you. The existing use will continue, and the space will be used for the enjoyment of a growing family, now with grandchildren on the way, and as parents get older. So it will just be continued. The use won't change. It will be enjoyed by the direct family and remain part of 16 Pembroke Road. I would also note that, just quickly, that along the walk directly opposite, there are large windows directly overlooking the garage itself, so it's not unusual to have glazing along the walk. There's lots of windows, just picking up on an earlier point. Thank you.
Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. Question is to the objector. We've made the note and we've read the applications. We've made the lot of points you've made in terms of the garage use only and not residential living space. The less than now 3 different figures, 2.5, 2.85, 3 meters. So all of that, as well as the light pollution. What will be, well, we're here to make a decision, obviously, to support the residents to make living better, but also not to make life difficult for other residents. So we are in a position of trying to be fair comments. But what will be your acceptable, since this development now has been recommended by officers? What condition would you suggest or office to us to add to the officers if we were to grant this application form? Is there any way of you can think of that?
I think the problem with the living conditions is dependent really on how it's used in the future. So if you're creating a premises that provides conditions for people to live in, and the people can change, properties change hands, and by allowing this to become more of a residential unit than it is now, one's increasing that potential for future disturbance to neighbours, not necessarily by the current owners, but by any owners in the future. So basically it's to contain the use of that premises to more what it was designed for, and not to change it to a residential situation. So it's difficult to answer your question as to what conditions one can put on, because you can't put conditions on people's behaviour, but you can restrict the environment in which those people might cause disturbance in the future.
So I understand.
Thank you very much. Have you got a...
yes,
okay, one follow-up, and then we're going to move on to the officers.
You've answered that question, obviously, the way you wanted me to hear, but I think you just made it very clear you don't want the conditions to be attached, or period you are against it. To my question to the applicant, the light pollution has been mentioned a couple of times, and we also have in the report. Can you, and you said the use will not change the same that has been used for the last 29 years. What different will be this? And can you tell us a bit more about the light pollution that may cause residents if the same residents continues to use the property or premises, or future, we cannot say they're moving or staying. It's their issue. We are not in a position to charge whether the resident stays or moves. We are only dealing with what we have. So rest assured, our decision does not respond to residents staying or moving. We deal with what we have at this moment. So please, can you clarify for me the use of the last 29 years, or it will be different, and the light pollution?
Thank you. It's difficult for us to predict the light pollution, I think, without full calculations, but the officer, the report has been thorough in making consideration of all the policies, and in particular there is a robust policy about light pollution, and the officers have considered that this would not be detrimental in this case. There are modest conservation roof lights in an existing roof, and north facing, as you can see, quite small high level windows looking onto the narrow walk. Could you just repeat your second part of the question? I'm not sure I answered it for you properly.
Was the residential use for the 29 years, will it be different from what you've already been used for?
No, not at all. I mean, any house, people use parts of their house as they like to use them, and this part of the building is going to be a little bit bigger in the basement, but no bigger at ground floor level, and would be used in the same way as it is now.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll move on to questions. Thank you. We'll move on to officers, questions to officers now. So I'd like to start. Could you please speak with us about the condition that was mentioned by the objectors, the 1991 condition that this should remain as a garage? And as part of that, could you also talk to us about whether this garage is viable? So there was some conversation about the turning circle. I know that we have sizing of garage. There's a particular size under which we said it's no longer usable as a garage. Could you also touch on that, please?
Of course, thank you, Councillor. So the condition that's been referred to this evening is condition 5 that was attached to a historic planning application. That planning application sought some alterations to the garage roof and a rear conservatory on the host building, and also a lower ground floor extension. So that condition was that the garage accommodation shall not be adapted for living, commercial or other purposes, and shall be available at all times for car parking. The reason given for that, as mentioned in one of the objectors' speech this evening, was that any other use of the garage would be prejudicial to the amenities of the residential buildings or of the area generally. So that was the reason given for that condition. So officers have considered the proposal against that reason or against the potential impact to nearby properties and the living conditions of nearby properties, and officers are of the opinion that it would continue to maintain an acceptable relationship. In terms of the garaging point, the studio or the garage building has been subdivided internally as shown on the plans, and I'll just bring those up for you this evening. So the studio building here, you can see that there is this internal partition. So when measuring this space, so the space that may be accessed as a garage, it measures 3.5 metres width and then 3.8 metres in depth. So when we look at that car parking space, it wouldn't comply with the car parking standards set out in the SPD document, which requires a car parking space or a garage to be at least 2.4 metres by 4.8 metres. If we were to measure the space or measure the garage without that internal partition, then it would comply with that measurement, and it would be 6 metres wide by 3.8.
Okay, so going back to that condition, what do we think has changed in the last 30 years to negate the need for that original condition?
So we've adopted a new development plan since the application was considered. Officers would consider and do consider applications afresh, so they'll look at the environment surrounding any building and the potential impact to the living conditions of those residents to date. So a new assessment has been carried out and has been found that it would continue to maintain an acceptable relationship. It's worth noting that the openings on the northern elevation that would face onto the walk, as mentioned, are 1.6 metres above head height, so officers aren't concerned that there would be overlooking directly to the properties to the north.
Just going back to that condition, our conditions have expiry dates on them normally?
So they don't have expiry dates, and it is something that is a consideration in the application before members this evening. Members will need to be satisfied that that condition is no longer necessary, or you're comfortable that the change of use or the use of that space as a studio or as laid out on the plans is acceptable and would continue to maintain an acceptable relationship with nearby properties. I would just reiterate to members that there would be no change of use and the building would remain in the same use, so it would be ancillary to the primary living space of number 16, and that's also conditioned through recommended condition 14.
Okay, thank you. I do have some concerns around the proximity of the neighbours, because it is obviously a very close site. But are there any other questions from the committee? Councillor Idris.
Well, you nicked both my questions, but I'm going to follow up with one small caveat. The wall, if the wall was removed, then it will be a garage. So how was the wall, did it get a planning permission, or was it, I don't know, permitted planning, or how did the wall come about?
So I don't believe that the wall benefited from planning permission. It hasn't been picked up in the officer's report or the relevant planning history. There are some, as members may be aware, some internal works which can be carried out without the benefit or without the need to apply for formal planning permission. But unfortunately, from looking at the history as provided in the officer's report, I don't think that was sought under planning permission. But I'm not convinced that they would need planning permission for that work either.
Councillor Oretti.
Thank you. Following from the Chairman's and Councillor Idris' question, so the office is convinced that we approve planning permission against the protection of garages. It's because that space is not usable as a car, sort of, you know, adjustable for a car thing. Is that what it's specifically you're saying?
Yeah, so as mentioned in the report, and as mentioned by residents this evening, there has been a comment or an objection received from the highways officer in relation to the loss of the car parking space and the loss of the garage. Officers have then reviewed that again and assessed it, and as mentioned, the site at the moment isn't being used, or the building at the moment isn't being used as a garage. The existing room, which could be used for the garage, doesn't meet the current standards. There's also some comments from officers in relation to the access into the garage, and it's quite a tight street along Pembroke Walk as well. So officers have taken the view that the loss of that space, or potential loss of a space, wouldn't have a material impact or a detrimental impact onto the surrounding highway network, and therefore is acceptable.
Councillor Svedenic.
Thank you. So, in your view as officers, do you think that this would set a new precedent in the sort of surrounding area that would eventually, this is something that the objectors raised before, that would, I suppose, set a precedent for a more sort of dense living, or dense residential area? Is it the case that this is unique in Pembroke Walk or around Pembroke Villas, Pembroke Road area? Are other garages sort of used as residential studios, or would this be entirely new?
Thank you. So there are garages along Pembroke Walk, and members may just see the side of one on this image on the left here. Each application would be considered with its own merits. So if an application was to be submitted for any other buildings along Pembroke Walk, a new assessment would be carried out in relation to its potential impact on living conditions and the surrounding townscape. But in this instance, officers are satisfied that it complies with the relevant policies and would continue to maintain that acceptable relationship.
Maybe it's not a material consideration, but it doesn't really answer. I just wanted to know if this is sort of a unique phenomenon in the area, that all the garages are sort of being used as residential studios, or would this set a new precedent?
So,
or do you not know? Which is
I don't know exactly what the other garages are used for that are neighbouring and adjoining this site. None of them, from what I can see, have had any of the openings changed that face onto Pembroke Walk, and they still have a garage door. But I'm not too sure in terms of the site specifics whether they are used for garaging or whether they're potentially used for another ancillary space.
Councillor Ali.
I understand this question relates to trees in the area, and from what I can see, condition 13 has been mentioned in the report. Can you assure us that no trees within proximity will be impacted or are protected for future environmental issues, just in case? Because I understand the report has mentioned very clearly this one, but I wanted to know if officers were to add or explore a bit more on this issue.
Of course, thank you, Councillor. So you're correct, condition 13 does require full details of protection of trees, so that requires that no development commences until those details are submitted to us for approval. So quite helpfully on the slide that's actually still up, you've got the existing location of the tree on the site here as well. The proposal for the basement and the scheme as a whole has been reviewed by the tree officers, and they're raising no objections subject to that condition. So officers are satisfied that there shouldn't be a detrimental impact to any trees of townscape or amenity value on the site or nearby.
Okay, colleagues, well, we need to start thinking about moving this to a conclusion. I mean, in my mind, I do feel quite uncomfortable about a condition that was put in place by this council. I know we've had various development plans that have come up, but nothing has really changed with the proximity of the buildings. So I really don't feel comfortable with the condition now. We're saying, oh, well, it doesn't matter to us anymore. I also don't feel particularly comfortable about behind closed doors subdividing garages so that later we can say the garage is no longer functional, because we've heard from our officers that that would normally be resisted. So, I mean, that's kind of where I am on this application. I don't think it's okay to say the condition no longer matters. It's very, very close to other buildings. It will look straight into Pembroke Walk. It will look into Pembroke Villas. They'll be able to look. It's just a very tight site, but I'll open it up to you. Anybody agree, disagree? Councillors? Councillor Ali?
You will on the spot there, Chair. I understand the point you're making, but at the same time, when officers make their assessments, and obviously applicant will have the opportunity to take an appeal of the issue, and I would agree with you in principle on that point. However, having said that, I believe because of the usage of the space, which obviously does not now meet the requirement of garage, I'm in the view of following the or accepting the accepting the officer's recommendation on this point. But I will come to the decision when it's needed.
Any other comments? Is everybody ready to move to a vote?
May we speak more or not?
No, I'm afraid not, sorry. Any other comments from any other committee members? So in that case, we'll move to a vote.
Yes, on the recommendation.
On the recommendation that the application be approved. Can those in favour please show?
One.
How many against?
Is that four?
No, I think it's one abstention. 3 against and 1 abstention. So planning permission is refused.
Excuse me, I'm the applicant, and it's actually going against the law here. The
sorry,
law is very clear, and
the committee's made their decision, so we're moving on to the next case now. Okay, okay, so the reasons. We'll move on to the reasons for refusal. So my reason would be the existing condition.
The law is very clear on this, I'm afraid.
Okay, we're now moving on to talk about the reasons for refusal. So we've had the comments from the audience, and now we're formulating our reasons for refusal. So it would be the existing condition and the impact on living conditions, neighbouring, and the loss of the garage space.
Sorry, just to clarify, to help us out with the, so when you talk about the previous condition, do you mean that the reasons for that condition would be the same today?
Yes.
Is that what you mean? Okay,
yes.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. Okay, no, that's fine, thank you.
Okay. Anything else on that one? Okay.
Yeah, we do need a proposer and a seconder. So, yeah, proposed by Councillor Idris.
And a seconder, Councillor Oretti? Okay, so now we vote for those reasons for refusal.
Three.
And against? Abstentions? And you're an abstention? Okay, so that's been refused.
Thank you. now move on to agenda items 17 to 19, Pelham Place.
Okay, evening Chair, evening members. What I'll do first, I'll introduce the case and then I'll go through some slides just to show the development as well. Firstly, please can I draw your attention to the addendum report regarding the application. There are some minor corrections and clarifications set within there. The application is for the excavation of a basement extension beneath the non-original part of the dwelling, as well as part of the garden area. The proposal also includes numerous other additions and alterations to the application property. However, it's of note that these elements of the proposal, which include replacement conservatory, a mansard roof extension, alterations to fenestration, and other alterations within the building and vaults, have previously been granted planning permission under previous planning applications and amendments thereof, and these are set out in section 4.4 of the committee report. It's also noteworthy that a number of conditions as attached to those approvals have now been discharged, so this planning application before us today has been supported by that information. The listed building consent application also covers the same works and development to the building as the planning application, as and where required. The members are therefore being asked primarily to consider the proposal for the subterranean extension, including the swimming pool. The proposed basement extension has been assessed against the basement policy within the adopted local plan and has been found to be consistent with all parts of this policy, unless it's set out in the report. There were no external manifestations and thus no undue impact expected to heritage assets, including the conservation area. Conditions are imposed to limit as far as possible any undue impact to residential amenity, including during construction, and include landscaping, trees, noise and anti-vibration measures, odour control in relation to the swimming pool, and contaminated land. Considerate structures scheme and a construction traffic management plan are also included. Given the proposal is consistent with policy and conditions are applied to minimise disruption during construction as much as possible, the Office's recommendation is for members to grant planning permission and listed building consent subject to conditions. I'll just now go through some slides. So we have the location plan here, an aerial view of the property, the existing plans, an existing section showing there's no basement there at the moment, the proposed plans with the basement and lower ground floor plan, the ground floor plan with the new conservatory constructed as already previously approved. This is an elevation with a swimming pool showing. And I'm prepared to go back through any of those slides if needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have objectors and the applicant registered to speak. So we'll start with the objectors. Where are the objectors? Ah, hello. Okay, so as before, 3 minutes between you to address the committee.
Thank you. We strongly object to the Office's recommendation to grant permission for the basement excavation of this proposal. The site is 2 joined mid-terrace properties with no access other than through the house. The scale of the basement proposal is out of proportion and no safeguards during construction have currently been presented. The whole of the terrace is Grade 2 star listed, and the heritage statement states the significance of the terrace lies with the street facade and the older living areas directly behind it. This is exactly where the spoil, machinery and equipment will be transported through. Neither the Construction Transport Management Plan nor the heritage statement detail how the significant fabric will be protected during these works. The scale of the development would mean 57 weeks of works on a property with no access. The street is narrow and the area is residential. No cumulative assessment has been undertaken of neighbouring construction activity. This will mean a huge level of inconvenience to locals. The heritage statement does not make reference to the basement impact assessment and the structural method statement, specifically how the proposed measures will safeguard both the host property and the neighbouring property. While the new basement access will not be under any historic foundations, because this part of the building has been more recently altered, this is not a sufficient safeguarding argument. These buildings were not built with substantial foundations. Any work to adjoining structures, even newer extensions, runs the risk of substantially destabilising the historic structure. As set out within the basement supplementary planning document, one of the main objectives of the local plan policy CL7 is to bear down on the volume of excavation in order to curtail not only the individual but also the cumulative effect of basement development on living conditions. Should other properties in the terrace follow suit, the result would be a significantly harmful change to the fabric and setting of this grade 2-star listed terrace. This would open the floodgates for large-scale development in gardens across the terrace and others in the borough, bringing back the situation that existed before this updated basement policy.
My name's Louise Huber. I'm a direct neighbour at number 21 Pelham Place. I'm also Deputy Chair of the Pelham Residents Association, and almost to a man, everyone I've spoken to about is severely upset at this plan. There are 3 points I want to make. In accordance with what my neighbours just said about traffic, there are other developments along Pelham Street. There are 2 big projects taking place near Brobton Cross. To have the idea of even more lorries in a very tight street. Just the other day, 2 weeks ago in fact, there was an ambulance in Pelham Place. The whole idea of having a logjam in the neighbourhood because of lorries for a swimming pool for a family that doesn't need it is, mind-boggling. The second point I want to make, the build has been taking place for about the last 6 months. It's been a story of ineptitude and bad management. I have had damp, they took away the conservatory, they didn't cover the wall that was exposed with a membrane. I have now 2 rooms with damp. They have put scaffolding across my roof without any permissions. They took down a chimney without even thinking what might happen into my home, and I have had a suit in full. These are just examples of 6 months of their work. I hate to think what a swimming pool may lead to. The third point is, these are, as my neighbour said, grade 2-star listed houses. The residents really do feel under threat in their historic homes. This is the first pool application. God knows what this may unleash. One of the current residents is trying to sell at the moment but can't because of the threat of this pool. We're all pleading to the council to vote no against this application, and we would encourage RBKC to introduce a planning policy against swimming pools in general for the ultra-rich in their homes when they've got others to go to.
Thank you very much. Now we move on to the applicants. Mr. Watson. Mr. Watson, you've got 3 minutes.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair and Committee. As has been explained to you, this application primarily seeks permission to enable the construction of a basement extension alongside the other above ground and internal alterations that have already been approved under separate consent. The basement design has been developed in consultation with your planning and conservation officers through pre-application discussions. Careful consideration has been given to the listed status of the house and the requirements of the basement policy CL7. In particular, the proposed siting and design of the basement ensures that the excavation works are set well away from the original listed building and the neighbouring houses. The access steps down from the house into the basement have been located discreetly within the modern rear extension. This ensures that there are no adverse impacts in terms of the hierarchy of the principal floors and spaces, and so to the overall heritage significance of the property. Although the proposal includes a swimming pool, the floor-to-ceiling height within the basement, including the pool area, is maintained at an absolute maximum of 4 metres to ensure that subdivision would not be possible and is in full accordance with your SPD. As a result, and as confirmed at paragraph 1.1 of your officer's comprehensive report, the proposal is considered to be in full compliance with policy CL7. I'd also note that it's similar to the basement extension that was granted planning permission and listed building consents at the neighbouring property number 21 in 2014, although that consent actually granted a larger percentage of 75% because it was considered under your previous policy. In preparing the submission, the applicant's consultant team approached the neighbouring property owners inviting comments on the CTMP, but also the proposals more generally. A meeting was also held with the Wellcome Trust Foundation, who is progressing the nearby developments on Pelham Street that have been referred to ensure coordination. Although the applicants are yet to move into this property, they've lived in London all of their lives and grew up in this area. When completed, the house will become the main home for them and their young children. They've experienced a number of building projects, including basement extensions at neighbouring houses in the past, and so appreciate that construction activity can cause inconvenience if it's not sensitively handled and well managed. This is an extremely important matter for our clients. They understand their neighbours' concerns and will undertake to ensure that site contractors follow best practice and fully comply with all the Council's policies and construction guidelines. As the committee will be aware, the policies and guidelines have been very carefully drafted by the Council to enable reasonable basement projects such as this to continue while minimising their impacts as far as is possible. We therefore hope that the committee will feel able to support your office's recommendation to grant this application. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, committee, have you got any questions for the applicant and the objectors? Councillor Idris.
My question is to the applicant. How are you planning to do all this development? I mean, how is the work going to be done? Because you have one entrance from the drawing, just the main entrance, unless you have a side entrance in front, no. So,
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, I have the project architect with me here, so he's more of a technical person than myself, so I'll confer with him if that's okay. So yes, there is only one entrance in and out through the property. The CTMP, which has been considered by your Highways Department, I believe they're happy with it, is proposed to suspend the 2 parking bays in front of the property. So material would be brought to those bays and would be loaded there. And there is a one-way system in force because of the developments on Pelham Street. So our vehicles would then go out following that one-way system. So we believe that it will work appropriately, and it's being considered, and your highway people agree that is the case.
and when do you plan to start work? If planning permission was granted tonight, when do you anticipate to begin work?
Yes, Councillor. As has been suggested, there are some existing consents where work has been progressing to a point, but obviously we've come to a sort of a pause waiting for your consideration of this application tonight. It's hoped that, subject to conditions that we would need to submit and discharge, then this would carry on within the next 2 or 3 months, we hope.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor
Thank you. To the objectives, you've mentioned the traffic in the local area and also the impact it may have to the local residents. And especially you've mentioned, I believe, Louis, you've mentioned the chimney before. Your property has been impacted prior to this, but there's nothing to do with this application in terms of what we are deciding now. I would like you, if you could explain a bit more the traffic and the damage you may think your property may happen to if we were to approve this application, please.
I think maybe my colleague would better speak about the impact of the traffic. We as residents are under threat just because of the enormity of the projects that are taking place in the neighbourhood. You say I can't mention the chimney. I mean, the contractor's gone bust, so the whole project has ground to a halt. That's a point I'd like to make across. So instead of being a building of a period of 18 months maximum, it's now going to be, who knows, I don't think they've got a new contractor yet. The dust, I suffer from asthma. I'm just thinking of all the dust of moving all that material out of the house, living right next door to it. I can't park outside the park. There are 5 houses on the left-hand side of the parking bay. If you're looking out, we can only fit 3 cars in for those 5 houses. So there's going to always be a real squash trying to get anywhere near your own home. But I'd like to pass it on about traffic to my lady.
As stated, it is a very narrow street, and if there are, currently the construction management plan states 57 weeks of work with, at worst case scenario, 3 vehicle deliveries a day, which is quite substantial, especially given potential cumulative proposals that have not actually been considered as yet. And if there are further delays, all of this actually continuously adds to the delays. In terms of the actual works, in terms of the property, there is a huge volume of soil that's going to have to be removed from the property. It's stated it will be through a conveyor belt, but it's currently going to go through the most significant parts of the house. Currently, there are no details of safeguard to the fabric of the property, which is Grade 2 star listed. Therefore, highly significant at both a national and an international level, hence why it's listed. There are no details of how this is to be protected, or what safeguards are going to happen if something were to happen.
Councillor Ali?
Thank you, Chair. Question to the applicants or the agent. Noise disturbance, the equipment that will be in place for the swimming, as well as pollution or noise disturbance to the local residents. And also, if I can ask about the future drainage, as you may know, in the local area there were flooding issues in Kensington and Chelsea in general. So could you please elaborate a bit more on those two?
Sorry, Councillor, could you repeat the first question? I got the one about the drainage.
Yes,
I didn't quite catch the first one.
It was the noise disturbance, the equipment that will be used, the noise that it generates for the residents.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, well, again, as the committee will be aware, your basement policy is designed to take these things into consideration. There are various conditions proposed on the report that the contractors have to sign up to the Considerate Constructors Scheme. They have to follow best practice guidance, and there is in the submitted CMS document exactly the point you raised about utilising good quality equipment, modern equipment that's designed to be as low noise as is possible. So we would follow the normal requirements that you place on any basement. In terms of flooding, yes, we're very much aware of that, and there's a flood risk and drainage, sustainable drainage strategy submitted with the application. I think it's conditioned as well that we actually improve the drainage on the site as part of this. I'm sure your officers will tell me, but I think it's policy CE2, I'm going to suggest, is the policy we have to comply with the 50% betterment, and that's part of the proposal.
Thank you very much. I have one last question for the applicant agent, which was what the objector said about the behaviour of the builder. And I just wondered if you've got any comments on that, because there's a big difference between a good builder and a bad builder, which I know we all know, but the impact on the residents, it just concerned me, some of the stories that we'd heard in the objection.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have found out that what's been suggested, that the contractor who has been doing the work unfortunately can no longer continue. There's been 3 or 4 new contractors interviewed in the last few weeks, and that's why I believe that the architectural team are confident that if permission was granted, they can start again in the next. So it will be a different contractor taking the scheme forward than has been to date. I know when I saw some of the objections as well, we did look into this because the current scheme is operating under your slightly lower policy of the construction. It's not a CTMP, it's the one below, the checklist A, because at the moment we don't have a basement. And I believe your environmental health people or highways people who run that scheme have been going and checking the site and making sure that it is in compliance, and to our understanding it's been given a clean bill of health by your officers checking the actual site works. Obviously, if detailed things have gone awry with the neighbour's property, that's something that the applicant will have to deal with. There's a party wall award in place, and that's designed to ensure that anything like that's picked up and neighbours are not inconvenienced. That would be at the cost of our client to deal with.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move. questions to the officers, and actually I'll just start very briefly. I mean, developments like this are a big concern to our residents, and we've all lived near developments like this, and we know the impact that they can have. So I really have a lot of sympathy with what our objectors have said. Having said that, we do obviously have a basement policy, and I think I would like to explore whether the basement is compliant, the 4 meters depth of the pool, whether everything's been considered about how deep it is. So perhaps you could comment on that first, please.
So yes, this is addressed in the report. The basement policy has been actually quite helpfully separated out in the report, and each point's been addressed to ensure that it is compliant. The depth has been specifically mentioned, 3 to 4 meters. 4 meters in floor to ceiling height, and that is within the policy. So the policy is whether it can be separated into 2 separate floors. In this case, it wouldn't be considered that would be possible, so that makes it compliant with the policy in this case.
And we're satisfied with the metre of topsoil and all those other conditions that we have around basements?
Yes, so the metre of topsoil specifically is for landscaping and the plants and trees above to ensure drainage as well and their growth. It does appear that every point's been addressed within the report and the basement policy, and it has been found to be sound and within, that policy framework.
Thank you. Questions to the officers, please. Councillor.
Okay, thank you, Chair. My question is, that area particularly right now has quite a few developments going on. We have 2 on Pelham Street, 2 major ones, and on Pelham Crescent and Pelham, there is quite a few also dotted around. And it is a one-way street, and a lot of the traffic management for 40 and 88 was more or less directed to come through that way. So the applicant said they will start in 3-4 months, and this will be within the same time the 40 and the 88 are starting, plus all the other developments, the smaller developments in the area. So how have we considered that? And I know we cannot we cannot give planning permission based on when they're going to start. We just assume they're going to start within the window. But do we consider the overall community, the overall impact of these developments within the community and its adverse effect on residents? I mean, is that something I know it's not a planning consideration, but is that something a humanity consideration?
So yes, that is actually a key consideration. So the construction traffic management plan that will need to be created and submitted as part of a pre-commencement condition will include other developments nearby. It will also consider other CTMPs that are in place, and they will have to speak to one another, and the CTMP will have to be consistent with those developments that are taking place at the same time or within the same time frame of this development.
Councillor Svennik, I'm sorry.
So just say Sonia. So 2 questions, and the first is a lot of the concerns that the objectors have are really about the construction traffic management plan. Is this something that would come back to planning committee at all? Is that a possibility?
Potentially. I mean, it will be submitted as a condition discharge, and there is a facility to call that application in if necessary, or object to those that condition as well.
Then could it possibly even be a condition if we were to approve this application firstly that the applicant sort of consults neighbours and then forms a construction traffic management plan and so on?
I believe it is. I'm just going to double check that it can be the case, yes.
Yes, if members would like the CTMP condition to be considered at planning committee in the event of approval, then yes, that can be arranged.
All right, and then the second question is So I'm just reading here, it says, one of the complaints is that other basements have been refused on the terrace because of the harm to the listed buildings, and officers say that this current application would avoid such harm. So forgive me if you've already answered this question, but in terms of the actual, not anything to do with the actual basement, but just going in and out and the the sort of the facade of the building and so on, why in this case would there be no damage done, but in other cases there would be?
It appears from the planning history and also from the report that there was pre-apps, including a conservation officer, and they will have visited the site and they will have also addressed any concerns. And in this case, ultimately, there was no objection to the planning application from the conservation team, subject to conditions set out in a listed building application, which do differ from the planning permission application.
Thank you. Actually, I've got a little bit of a follow-on question on the listed building, because I think that's a really great question. The CTMP, we've talked about the conveyor going through the house, and obviously that's the listed building itself. How would that possibly prevent harm to the listed building? Because we've all seen these mechanisms. I mean, they literally punch through the house, put the conveyor belt in, and, you know, off they go. And that sounds very damaging to a listed building. So how would we be able to manage that?
It does appear that there are conditions attached to make sure that the internal fabric remains in situ and without damage, unless otherwise noted by drawings. And there's also a condition regarding any demolition within the building. So subject to the equipment required not harming the building or damaging the building, it would be kind of difficult to control that if it was to take place.
You're saying it's difficult to control that damage to the listed building?
Sorry, just to confirm. So the conditions that are added are there to prevent any damage to the original fabric of the building, and if they deviate from that for any reason, which is unlikely, but if they do, they would be subject to enforcement action and legal action. So it's really in the best interest of the applicant to comply with those conditions.
Sorry, if presumably, let's imagine there was a damage to, I don't know, the structure or the walls to the neighbouring properties because of the, I don't know, mismanagement of that construction, and then enforcement is being carried, would that overturn the planning, or not necessarily, I believe?
Not necessarily. So any damage to neighbouring properties would be a civil matter, and that would be dealt with by the courts. It wouldn't affect the planning permission. But any damage or works to the original fabric of the listed building that's not consented, like the host site, which is slightly different to the neighbours, would be subject to enforcement, yes, because you would need planning permission for virtually all work on a listed building, and carrying out work without that permission is illegal, a criminal offence, essentially.
So just to understand this, will we go and check how this conveyor belt is set up? I mean, how are we going to ensure that these conditions are met?
Well, the conditions would need to be complied with, and if they're not, our enforcement team will be notified, and they'll go out inside and have a look. The conservation area officers have a keen interest in these buildings as well, so they're very likely to monitor works as they go.
Sorry, can I just add that there is an associated listed building consent application, and there's lots of conditions attached to that as well, all of which have to be
I can see that, but I guess I'm just questioning how you can protect an interior when there's going to be a great big conveyor belt going through it.
I can understand your concern for sure, but it's not an uncommon practice. It's a fairly, when I say standard, it's very doable. It's been done on other buildings. So there's always obviously a risk associated with workmanship, but it's, as I said, that would then come down to either enforcement or legal action depending on the nature of the damage. But it is a methodology that is possible, should we say, and has been done before.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. I think you've asked a really good question in terms of the great list danger that it may cause. And also, I think residents also mentioned the damage that it could cause neighbouring residents. But my question is to the health-related issues for all the excavation and the sand and everything else that comes along. What will be the case if, for example, I'm not suggesting developers or contractors will make any problem. Will that be already too late to react to it, rather than just making the decision now in terms of a health grant for not just for the local people, not to protect the Grade 2 listing building, but also the residents who we have mentioned now have asthma, and they're here to speak to us about it. So is there any health issue or healthy grant we can add to the condition, or to make a decision based on that?
Just to clarify, when you talk about health, you mean associated with dust and vibration and noise and that sort? Yeah, so there is a specific condition around that, I believe. Let me just double check that. Let me actually just check that right now so I can answer the question directly.
There is a construction management statement which will cover that, those impacts, yes.
Yeah, that's right. So these matters are, will be considered. In terms of, if these are breached and they are a resultant health impact, again, that would be a civil matter, but we're now debating, hypothetical non-compliance with construction methodology, which I think would go a little bit beyond the planning considerations.
Thank you.
Sure.
I think we can start to move towards a decision on this application. I mean, the disruption that these developments cause to residents, we know them well, we get emails about them, we get letters of concerns about them, and it is very, very disruptive. But I think, as Councillor Ali said in the previous application, we've got to balance that with our residents' desire to improve their residences, and the houses do belong to them. So as long as they comply with our policies and national policies, it should be acceptable. The basement in this case is compliant with our policy, and there are safeguards in place to manage the neighbours' properties and the dust and the disruption, and it's not perfect. I mean, there's always going to be disruption. I'm concerned about the listed building, but I do feel that I have seen work done to listed buildings before. So I feel that that's not really a reason for us to refuse this application. But I open it to you if you have any other comments or concerns.
My main concern is the area is really blighted by a lot of developments, and I know that is not a planning material, but you still have to be, I think the reason we're sitting here is need to be reasonable, and we need to be considerate, and we need to, because the planning laws are not, they don't breathe, they don't have a heart that beats, and I guess we put the heart that beats into these applications, and that's where I am struggling.
Yeah, I understand. I really do. But does anybody else have any other comments to make? The recommendation is to approve the application, so can those in favour of that recommendation please show? Regretfully. Four. Yeah. Any against? Thank you. Yes, we will have a short break now, 5 minutes. Okay, is everybody here who needs to be here? Shall we restart? Okay, but before we move on to Seymour Walk, I apologise, I'm not doing very well here today. I forgot to do the vote for the listed building. I feel like this planning committee is littered with things that are tripping me up. So the recommendation... Oh.
Sorry, beg your pardon. Yeah, so yeah, just to confirm, it was stated in the debate just before the vote, but I'm just confirming it now, that the CTMP for the planning permission application is going to come back to a future planning applications committee. Yeah, we'll agree to that. So, so then now we can move on to...
Now we move on to the listed building consent. So the recommendation is to grant listed building consent. Can those in favour please show? And one abstention from Councillor Idris.
Councillor Idris was against.
Abstention or against? Abstention.
4 and 1 abstention.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, so I think we've concluded with that application. Now I have another question, which is, I'm not sure that the objector is here. Is for the next application?
Oh, it was actually a supporter.
A supporter. Oh, okay.
It's listed under objector. That's unhelpful. But
Oh, I see.
No, I don't think he's here.
No. Give an objector. You don't need. No, that's what I thought. So we'll have the presentation and move straight on to the discussion.
Yes, it'll be straight in.
Sorry, I've made you wait so long. And
yeah, I'm sorry. The rules are that you'd have to hear the presentation and then...
Well, it's the rules. I think if you don't have an objector, then the applicant shouldn't be speaking. The applicant, yes. Yes. Well, actually, it wasn't even an objector. It was a supporter.
Yeah.
There's just something wrong with this speakers list.
Are you sure it was a supporter?
Well, it's said here, but it could be a typo. It could be, but yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah.
They were supporting. Yes, your mic, please.
This is a similar application that's already been approved at Peel.
Yes.
And there's just a slight difference because we've moved it.
I understand.
And so we're piling now,
But,
hence
no,
why
I
it's
understand,
a lot quicker. I can't explain.
Mr. Lax, would he Nigel, would he have been supporting the application?
They don't like to support applications because it's a basement, but in principle, because we've gone through the CTMP and this is going to be quicker, that's why initially registering support. But I think at the moment, they, because of disruption, they don't like to support. So it's a difficult situation because obviously there is disruption, but we have been engaging with the residents, and there's ongoing things, but we're trying to mitigate as much as possible, and hence hopefully this can be explained.
I think, given the rules,
yeah, I won't speak anymore.
I know you've waited so long.
No, I don't want, because I don't want to speak out of turn what other people would be saying, because there's.
Yeah, I understand. So I think we'll have the presentation and then we'll move. Let's just...
It just appeared that the comment was an objection, so I don't know whether it's a mistake on this document, but if they're not here in any event. Exactly.
It's not here. So, okay, we'll just move, we'll move ahead with the presentation, and I'm going to read this. Please, who's...
James. Yeah.
You're moving, okay.
I'll do it, yeah.
All right, presentation from Jen.
Brilliant, okay. So like the previous one, I'll go through an introduction first and just go through some slides. Again, firstly, please can I draw your attention to the addendum report regarding the application with some minor clarifications and amendments therein. The application is for the excavation of a basement extension, including swimming pool, beneath the dwelling and garden areas, with associated internal plant and above ground landscaping. The proposed basement extension would excavate a total of 1,369 cubic metres. It's noteworthy that a larger basement was refused planning permission at Planning Committee under application PP 23-03532, which was actually 13% larger at 1,570 cubic metres. However, this basement extension was allowed at appeal, and therefore planning permission is in place for this larger extension. An amended scheme of a smaller basement extension of 1,369 cubic metres, so the same volume as this one, was granted planning permission under application PP 24-00799. There are some alterations in the overall shape of the basement under this application today, as set out in the submitted plans. However, the key fact is the proposed extension is the same volume as a previously approved application and smaller than the basement allowed at appeal previously. A robust CTMP has been submitted and this has been conditioned. The officer's recommendation is for committee to grant planning permission subject to conditions. And just to help, I'm just going to go through some slides, but there are some points you might want to come back to. So site location plan, aerial view, site photographs, the existing section, this is the proposed section, and then what the officer has done is try to show some previous applications just for reference. So this is the allowed at appeal section. The green dotted line indicates the depth of the extension. We have another section which has the current proposal and the one allowed at appeal, just for comparison purposes. Again, another section, again with the one allowed at appeal and a current application. This is the proposed basement floor plan, the proposed ground floor. And finally, what the office has done on this page is shown all three applications just side by side in an attempt to show what the changes have been. And that concludes the presentation.
Thank you very much. So I'll kick off with a question which is about the size of this basement. I think from what you've said, what is being applied for here is smaller than what has been already allowed for at appeal. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. So this one is 1,369 cubic metres of excavation, and the previous one was slightly more than that, 13% more.
Okay, and I'm reading Nigel's statement here. He's asking that the CTMP comes back, and actually he's saying that the excavation time has become smaller, and he's questioning whether that's really really the case. Do you have that detail on the CTMP?
I'm just checking the conditions now, just to double check.
The excavation period is halved and the overall programme some 6 months shorter. Is that because the basement's smaller?
It would be based on less excavation. So because there's less material to remove, the construction traffic management plan wouldn't be as, you know, it needed as long, yeah.
Okay, well, I can't really ask you to comment on it. I mean, that's the answer from the officer. Colleagues, have you got questions for the officers? Councillor Oretti.
Thank you. In the summary, it says 3 residential buildings, which is part of the existing number, or is it? Still don't get it. I mean, the wording. So the basement extension underneath the plot that accommodates 3 residential buildings, you mean it's the size, you mean?
Sorry, what was the question there?
Sorry, question to you.
I didn't quite catch the question.
All right, so the proposal, the basement underneath it says accommodates 3 residential buildings. Does it mean within number 5 or which spreads across other?
I can answer that. There's 3 buildings on site. That's why that's what that's referring to. It's the same property, but there's 3 separate buildings.
Any other questions?
Just on the basement policy, I know CL policy 7, which shouldn't exceed 50% of the back garden. Is that incompliant because it's within 50% or?
Yes, so again, the basement has been assessed against the basement policy in all 3 applications, including this one, and it meets the standards for that policy as well.
Okay, any other questions to the officers? I mean, I feel there's a little bit of confusion here about why the schedule has changed. Do you know the answer to this?
Yes, I can answer this. So it's set out in paragraph 4.7 of the officer's report. It's a revised CTMP that takes into consideration neighbouring concerns, including agreed smaller vehicles, reduced depth of the basement, so there's about 15% less soil being removed, additional proposed vehicle movements per day, a revised structural design for the basement utilizing piling to specifically speed up the construction where possible, and simplifying the basement design and construction to require less concrete, about 30% less concrete pins.
Okay, so okay, that's really good. So I think we understand now what the differences are. So I'm feeling like quite a lot of work has been done on this CTMP to get to what you've just described.
Yes, that's correct, and it's been off the back of consultation.
Well, I think that's a question for us. Do we feel that it should come back? I mean, it's a big development, but also I do feel that there's been quite a lot of backwards and forwards on this, and they've really done a lot of work on it. So, I mean, let's not waste the committee's time if that work's been done. Councillor Ali, and then...
Thank you, Chair. My response to that will have been, if officers have done and it has already been worked out, I think it's fair to make the decision tonight rather than asking them to come back again. And it's not the first time this application has come, so it's important to make a decision now and then.
I feel I agree with that position.
I agree with that proposition, yeah, thank you.
Any other comments before we move to a vote? No. Okay, well, in that case, the recommendation is to approve the application. Can those in favour please show? Okay. Approved. Okay, we move on to 3 Glendower Place. Who will be presenting this? You again? Okay, all right, James, thank you.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. So, yes, 3 Glendower Place. Again, can I draw your attention to the addendum report regarding the application? There have been some minor alterations and amendments made therein. Just to clarify as well, this application is for planning permission and advertising consent together. It's of note that the alterations to the shop front, subject to this application, and the display of replacement signage have already taken place. As such, this application is seeking the retention of the altered shop front and signage as is. Objections have been received largely due to the position of signage and the opening up of windows at lower ground floor level, and whether this is appropriate for the structure of the building. However, it's important to note that the windows that have been opened up were existing. They had just simply been boarded up. It's also of note that the previous shop front was considered a lower quality design than the current shop front that this application seeks the retention of. Therefore, the officer's recommendation is for members to grant planning permission and advertising consent subject to conditions for both applications. And just to go through some slides briefly. Site location plan. This is the former shop front that's no longer there. This is some plans of the retrospective or retention of the current shop front and some design details and some lighting. So there is a bit more illumination in this sign and then the current shopfront in situ, as you can see in these images. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee on this one? I mean, I couldn't spot the difference, to be honest with you. I know there are some, and I read what they were, but it didn't feel very material to me. I mean, I think we can probably move straight to a vote on that one. So oh, of course, because thank you, Lorna, thank you. So for the planning permission first, the application is recommended for approval. Can those in favour please show? And then we have the what is it? Signage application.
And the addendum did change the recommendation, because at the moment it reads grant planning permission, and it should have said grant advertisement consent.
Oh, yeah, I did spot that actually,
Yeah,
yes.
that's changed in the addendum.
I did spot that. Okay, so the application for the signage is recommended for approval. Can those in favour please show? So that one is approved as well. We move on to Ralston Street. That's you again. Okay, please go ahead.
Okay. So again, firstly, please can I draw your attention to the addendum report. There are some minor alterations and amendments within. This application is for the erection of a single-storey rear infill extension and at lower ground floor level and ground floor levels. My apologies, a two-storey extension, as well as provision of a rear elevation staircase to provide access to the garden from the ground floor. So just to clarify, there's a lower ground floor and an upper ground floor. I'll just show the plan for clarity. This is the two-storey extension in replace of the existing single-storey extension here. In addition to those alterations, there are some minor alterations to fenestration proposed, and as well as that, the proposal is to amalgamate existing flats at lower ground floor and ground floor levels to create one unit. The amalgamation is within the thresholds and limits as set out within the adopted local plan. Part of the internal works include provision of a lift. This does not require planning permission in its own right, but nonetheless conditions have been added with regards to potential noise and vibration from the lift. Objections have been received with regards to impacts on the conservation area, as well as loss of daylight or loss of privacy to nearby units. These points of objection have been addressed in the officer's report, and there's no additional comments to make at this time. Officers have considered that the proposal is consistent with local and national planning policies, and thus it is recommended that members grant planning permission subject to conditions. So just to clarify on these slides, so there's an existing single-storey extension at lower ground floor level, and the proposal is to infill this gap here and provide a two-storey extension at lower ground floor and upper ground floor levels. And then the existing, there's two apartments within. There's actually 3 units within the entire building, but on the lower ground floor there's 1 apartment, and then on the upper ground floor there's another apartment. The proposal will see them amalgamated, and the extension will be just to 1 unit. That's created a 2-storey unit, with the external spiral staircase at the back as a means of access. The upper floors will be largely unchanged, but for the lift that's been installed, that'll go up to the 3rd floor level. And just to help members, this is some photos of the rear of the property. This is where the infill extension will go. And this is the side wall that the 2-storey extension will be built against. There's no windows to this wall, it's just a blank wall, a blank elevation. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions to officers? Councillor.
I understand we are very much against amalgamations, but you're making an exception here. Why?
So the current local plan does allow for amalgamations in some circumstances. There are certain thresholds that must be adhered to. And in this case, this amalgamation didn't breach those thresholds. So therefore it was allowed, and it is permissible under the local plan's rules.
Was the original basement flat, is it habitable? Is it a good size for habitation, or is it below standard?
I'll just put the plans back on the screen one moment. So the existing plans show the two separate apartments, and they have been lived in separately. But the proposal is to amalgamate them both, and the resulting floor area, when they're both together, wouldn't breach the threshold in our local plan. So therefore, the local plan does allow for this kind of amalgamation currently.
Just an extension. Could you remind me what's the, in terms of the size, the amalgamation threshold is? Is it 110 square meters?
I'll have to double check that. Oh, 170, thank you. 170 square meters.
170, right, thank you.
I have a question about the staircase at the back, because there was some concerns around loss of privacy. Can you just make some comments on that, and who was concerned about it in relation
Certainly.
to this?
So the concerns were the direct neighbours to the building. So they're both, I think I'm pretty sure they're all apartment buildings that have been separated somewhat. So users of the staircase would get fleeting glances of neighbouring gardens when it's in use. But as it's not somewhere people are going to stay for a while, they're just going to be using it to ascend or descend the staircase. The loss of privacy wouldn't be so significant to warrant refusal in this case.
Any other comments? Oh, Councillor Svedena. Sonia.
There are a few sort of complaints or concerns about possible noise resulting from the lift installation, and you said here that it wouldn't require a noise impact assessment. Could you explain why?
So the reason behind that is because the lift itself doesn't require planning permission. There's some difficulty in how we would be able to control that through a noise assessment. However, despite that, conditions 9 and 10 do require noise, I believe it's insulation, I'll just double check, and also vibration mitigation measures. So although it's not covered, it is actually covered by condition.
Thank you. Any other comments before we move to a vote? Okay, so the application is running out of steam. Application is recommended for approval. Can those in favour please show? So that application is approved. We now move on to 140 to 142 Kensington Church Street. Yep, Alice.
Okay, thank you. So before I begin my presentation, I would again draw members' attention to the addendum report and the additional representation received and some changes, amendments to the officers' report. So the application before members this evening relates to 140 to 142 Kensington Church Street. So the application is a retrospective application which seeks planning permission for the installation of some raised decking and some stainless steel fixed handrails. This would be used for a maintenance area associated with the existing office. So I've just put a existing site photograph on the slide before members, so you can see the raised decking and the installation of the handrails. I would draw members' attention to the recommended conditions. So we've got recommended condition 2, which requires that area to only be used for maintenance works associated with the commercial office, and for it not to be used at any time as an external roof terrace amenity space or to hold any outdoor meetings or social events. The recommendation is to grant planning permission subject to those conditions. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I have a question about this issue of the roof terrace being used as a roof terrace. So, I mean, actually, I think it's probably an improvement on what was there before, but I think it's a really real concern from people that living nearby, that somebody puts this up and then 6 months later they're having parties on it and all sorts of stuff is going on. And, you know, I know we have enforcement, but it's not... I guess I'm asking, is there anything else we can put into the condition to help with some of these local concerns? Because enforcement is enforcement, and I know it works, and it just takes a long time. And anything that we can do to help these residents, because to me that looks like a roof terrace. So I really worry that people are going to use it for that. And it might be the odd office party, but is there anything else we can do to help the local people?
Thank you. So you're right. So we have got the condition to aim to control the use of that space. We have also got the plans that they've provided that this application, should it be granted, would be subject to comply to. That includes the proposed plan, which shows the roof area or the decking as maintenance, so it's labelled as maintenance roof area. I would also note, let members know that the existing roof is also used for maintenance, so they have previously used this space for maintenance as well, so that there wouldn't be necessarily a new use of that. It's really just the addition of the decking and the stainless steel handrails. If for any reason they weren't complying with that condition, or there was a material change of use, so they were using it as a terrace or amenity space, that would require planning permission in its own right, and then officers would consider the acceptability of that against the relevant policies at that time. I'm just not too sure how we could strengthen that condition.
I mean, the concern here is we have a large number of residents who do stuff and then they come for retrospective applications, and it's becoming like a joke. I get away with it, and then when people catch me, oh well, I'll go and I'll get an application for it, and that is a concern. And this rooftop, it's too nice for maintenance. I mean, maintenance stuff usually got tarmac and up and down and bubbly bits, but this is too nice. People are going to want to have a cigarette there or a vape or whatever they're smoking these days and have a drink, and next thing you know, it's going to be 2 people, and before you know it, it's 6, 7, and 8.
Sorry, just to remind you though that the application, if I'm not mistaken, is just for the decking and the handrails. It's not actually for a use. I mean, the use is already there as maintenance use. I mean, like, you know, I appreciate your concerns, but well, I mean, there is condition 2. I mean, we do enforce against these conditions. I mean, if it started to be used as a terrace, then I'm pretty sure the council would know about it pretty quickly.
Is the derailing, I mean, the railing and the decking makes it into a terrace. Can we I don't know, request something less attractive, less terracey, if you see what I'm saying?
I think members and officers would need to determine the application based on the plans provided as part of this application. Officers have reviewed the decking and the railings and its associated impact and have found that it would be acceptable. I think in terms of, as we've mentioned, the use of it, that roof terrace is already accessed through a door onto what was there pre-existing, this timber decking, so that use has already been established.
What happens if we refuse?
What happens if we refuse it today, for instance? What happens?
So if members were minded to refuse the application, we would likely need to discuss with our enforcement colleagues to ensure that we would then take the appropriate enforcement action.
What is the enforcement action? Is it remove it?
Sorry, in a nutshell, it'll be a judgment for our enforcement colleagues as to whether or not they actually take enforcement action or not, and that would depend on whether or not they deem it to be, what's the word? Expedient, sorry, to do so. Not all breaches result in action, if that makes sense. It depends on the nature of it. In some cases, a breach is deemed to not be expedient to take action because of the level of impact it may or may not have, and that's in accordance with the law.
So if we deemed it not expedient to take any action, we refused it, then the officer deemed it not expedient to take any action, what happens? It stays on and people use it?
No, so because it depends on the nature of the breach. So for instance, in this case, and this is, I don't want to make an assessment on behalf of our enforcement colleagues.
No.
They may decide that they do want to take action. We don't know. It's just that would be a decision that they would need to take. If let's say in a hypothetical that it was refused, and for whatever reason enforcement decided not to take action, and then they started using it for office parties, that would be a very different situation, and then enforcement may then at that point decide to take action because there's now that change of use, which is far more impactful, let's say. But if it was continued to be used as maintenance, then they may take the view then not to take action. So it all depends on the nature of the breach and the impact on neighbours, essentially. If there's going to be a material impact on neighbouring amenity, they're far more likely to take enforcement action. Does that make sense?
And I think in this case, there isn't any impact on the neighbours other than to make it nicer. So it's very difficult to think about how you would refuse it. And also, I mean, I'm reading this objection from the neighbour who looks directly onto it. I feel like if they were having parties, he would have written it down. And he hasn't. How long has it been there?
It is in the report. Let me quickly check.
I mean, he said they put some pot plants there, which again makes it nicer for him.
It's definitely in the report. I do remember seeing it there, just off the top of my head. I can't remember. This is number 2.
So just section 6.2 of the officer's report discusses that the stainless steel handrails were replaced between the 25th of January and the 1st of February 2024.
So at some point earlier this year, essentially.
Okay, so 6 weeks later, he hasn't said they're having parties. I mean, okay. Look, I kind of, I don't like it either when people just do this retrospective stuff, but I can't see any reason for refusal. So I think we move to a vote on this one. Can those in favour of applications recommended for approval, can those in favour please show? Application is approved. Okay, we'll move on to the last application of the evening. It's a big application, actually. I mean, quite big impact on a... Anyway, Alice.
Thank you. So this application before members relates to 171 to 175 Portobello Road. The application is seeking planning permission for a change of use to allow the expansion of an existing public house. Again, I would draw members' attention to the addendum report with some minor corrections to paragraphs within the officer's report and a change to the reason of condition 3 to reference some of the new local plan policies. So the site location plan can be seen on this slide. So this is the existing on the left-hand side and then the proposed on the right-hand side, and this is the basement level. So currently the site is formed by a public house, which is in sui generis use, and then a retail unit or a commercial unit, which is Class E. So the existing, you can see that the Class E is in this location, and as part of the proposal, it would be changed to form an expansion to the existing public house. So at basement level, that would be used for a prep kitchen, and then some stores to the rear as well, and a refuge area. At the ground floor level, again, we've got the existing on the left-hand image, and then the proposed on the right. So the proposal would see the the change of use of the existing Class E use into that sui generis public house. I would draw members' attention to the partition to the rear of the site. This was sought as part of some amended plans in conversations with the Ladbroke Association to seek some additional glazing in this location and to ensure that this space wasn't so large, so it divided that dining area up. I would draw members' attention just to some conditions that further safeguard living conditions of nearby properties and traffic as well. So we've got condition 5 for an operational management plan and recommended condition 4 for details of refuge and recycling. It is also worth noting that recommended condition 3 requires a scheme of sound insulation, and that's due to the residential properties located on the upper floors. The recommendation before members this evening is to grant planning permission subject to those recommended conditions and the conditions listed in section 9 of the officer's report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alice. Any questions to Alice? I mean, I'll actually make a comment on this one, which is, I'm surprised nobody came to talk about it. I remember there was one very similar, Portobello Gold, which created a lot of noise on the street, and that kind of reassures me, to be honest, because I think if people were really very concerned, they would be here. There are a lot of objections, and people, of course, want to keep the Portobello Star as it was, and we all like that, but we also live in a world where things have to move on, so it's good to see that they've put the separation to try and keep that historical space as it is, but actually I think it's a good thing that it's going to be more viable and more people can enjoy it and use it, and it's a busy street, and that we all know Portobello Road, so I would actually support this application. Any other comments? Kasim? No? Well, we move very quickly.
I'm with you on this one, and happy to take a vote when you're ready, Chair.
So the recommendation is to approve this application. Can those in favour please show? That one is approved. Thank you. Gosh, a bit of a marathon this evening. Thank you, committee. Thank you, officers. And the meeting's now closed.